30 years of transformation. It's amazing. When I was preparing the slides for this, I thought, 30th anniversary of the chapter. Obviously, it's a bellwether event in our history. It's one of those milestone type numbers, and I thought about what's happened for me personally in the last 30 years, and I think I joked with Steve Beamer at the holiday gala that 30 years ago I was the age of my oldest son, who is now 21 right now. And I thought about where I was as a 21-year-old, about to embark on my fifth year of undergraduate studies, because I did an internship middle of my undergraduate time, and imagining what life would be like for me after I graduated. Obviously, 21-year-old Sean could not have imagined all the things that have happened in between now and where 51-year-old Sean is currently. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of look back on a number of the changes that we've seen in the last 30 years ish, and kind of think about how those changes came about and evolved, and what it means for what we approach our future challenges going forward. So again, I'm going to kind of just highlight some of the major changes I've seen over the last 30 years, the world has seen over the last 30 years, look a little bit about the nature of those changes and how they evolved. And spoiler alert, I think we'll find that all the changes did not sort of emerge in a vacuum, right? Every change, whether it's social media or political strife or social change or whatever it might be, has all happened in the context of all the other things that have happened, right? It truly is kind of a systems of systems almost kind of view of things in some ways. But I think that's what we need more of, right? We need more systems thinking. We need more holistic solutions to things. And so that's a lot of what I'm going to highlight in this brief. All right, so technological advancements is one of the categories to look at. And I will say, I could have just, I could have had hundreds of slides looking at each of these areas, technological advancements being the first area that we're going to look at. Obviously, so much has happened since the early 90s. So I had to cherry pick a few things for each of these categories. So if your favorite thing didn't show up in a particular category, I apologize. It was just a lot of things to go through. But one of the big things was the rise of the internet, right? I remember as a 21-year-old at Rensselaer Polytechnic, going to our campus's central computing lab with all of its old style desktops and everything. The idea of a World Wide Web was in its infancy. And as we see here, was only made available in 93. Google didn't even come along until 98. So a lot of the things that we take for granted now, like, going and Googling something online, that was not a verb, wasn't even anything that you could think about back in the early 90s, right? Same with smartphones. I've got my iPhone here, next to me, using it as a hotspot as I sit here in building 200 at APL. And back in the early 90s, I remember joking with a friend of mine saying I couldn't really envision why anybody would need access to the internet from a mobile device like their phone. Why not just go and sit down at a desktop? There's plenty of desktops around. And now, obviously, looking back, I think, how silly I was to think that was ever, something that I could live without. Now everybody has a smartphone and it influences so many different aspects of our daily life. And again, it's hard to imagine that the iPhone came out, in 2007. And in that time, it's obviously changed quite a bit of our society, as well as changed how we use different kinds of technology. So digital cameras, GPS navigation, it's all built into our iPhones now, or into our phones in general, I should say. And those phones have become like 21st century Swiss Army knives, right? Now it just seems kind of silly to think of having a separate GPS navigation device in your vehicle, when you could just have your phone out, right? In addition, other technological advances, e-commerce obviously didn't exist back in the late 80s, early 90s, or at least was very much a nascent kind of concept. It really obviously took off as the internet took off, especially as we got to high-speed internet and some of the technologies we have now. Amazon, founded in 1994. So, we're not the only ones celebrating a 30th anniversary this year. And obviously, Amazon has revolutionized the way that we uh, consume, whether that's consuming media, whether that's consuming products, and how those things are delivered, for good or bad, right? And I'm not gonna, judge one way or the other, but we certainly can't deny the impact that Amazon has had on our lives in terms of commerce and media. In addition, we've seen a lot of changes in artificial intelligence, virtual assistants, automation, you name it. I had to throw in a little reference to Clippy. If you guys remember back in '96 when Clippy was released and you're writing a Word document and suddenly this paperclip shows up and starts saying, "Hey, it looks like you're writing a resume. Can I help you with that?" That was one of the first virtual assistants. Um, Things like the Internet of Things, that was coined in '99, believe it or not. I thought that was a much newer concept, but it's been around for a while. That term first appeared then, and obviously now as we've gotten into higher speed internet and higher bandwidth and so forth, and a lot more connected e-devices, we're seeing a lot more interconnectedness of our various products. Things like the Roomba, which came out in 2002, where, if you wanted, you could have something kind of wheel around and clean your room or whatever. Those things are one of the first automated robot assistants, and we've seen more of those things develop over time. Obviously, things like Siri, which arrived in 2011, one of the first virtual assistants, followed soon after by Alexa. Those have changed the way we interact with our technology quite a bit. Being able to simply ask a virtual assistant to look up information for you, or to find the nearest restaurant or whatever it is. And then, of course, only a couple years old, but already causing a lot of waves. AI, right? So things like ChatGPT in particular, released in 2022, which has really caused a lot of ripple impacts in terms of, thinking about impacts to the economy or the workforce or to education or things like that. And I will tell you, in the interest of full disclosure, this brief was partially generated by ChatGPT in terms of helping me identify areas to talk about and a general outline of some of the things to discuss in terms of categories. And you probably guessed, even the slide deck, was partially generated by Microsoft's designer in PowerPoint, pulling up, different imagery based on what words it's picked out of the content that I put on the slide. So thought it'd be interesting just to do that as a way to kind of show, how much one can lean on things like AI and virtual assistants and things like that, for better or for worse. Global economy wise, obviously we've seen a lot of change in the emerging markets. Economic powerhouses like China have become, more and more, prevalent on the world stage in terms of how it affects, various trade agreements and interdependencies of various economies and that kind of thing. So a lot of changes in the world since the early '90s in terms of that. Also a change in business models. So I mentioned Amazon. That already is a huge change in business models, where instead of having brick and mortar stores and little mom and pop shops, now we go to things like a Walmart, and then eventually we go to a thing like an Amazon, where there isn't even a physical store at all. You just have distribution warehouses and other things have changed too. Taxis. have begun to go the way of the dodo over the last decade as we've moved to things like Uber. And so the evolution of the internet, the rise of the use of smartphones, all these things have changed the way we approach things from an economic standpoint as well as a technological and social standpoint. And speaking of social and cultural changes, we've seen a number of different changes over the last 30 years, partly in terms of just social norms and our attitudes towards our fellow person on this planet and how we relate to one another, changes in our attitude on both a local and global scale and how we relate to one another, more push and drive and movements for finding equality and social justice, which are huge, right? So the rise of the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter, and a number of these other movements that have really helped to revolutionize how we think about one another and how we embrace one another and find common ground. It's not to say that's been without its hiccups, right? And obviously, there's a lot of other, you know, things that have been challenges over the last 30 years that have been obstacles to those movements. But a lot of social change, a lot of cultural change that I believe for the most part have been very positive. In addition to that, those things have been fueled by things like social media and also how our popular culture has changed in terms of how we get our entertainment. So social media, believe it or not, Facebook was founded back in 94. I didn't realize it was that old actually. I first Googled MySpace, thinking MySpace would be the oldest social media platform I would find. In fact, there was one back in 97 that I didn't list here, but MySpace was created in 2003, only to then be supplanted by Facebook around 2008. But those changed how we stay connected to one another, right? And now your circle of friends has grown and become more of a virtual circle of friends where you can keep up with folks despite the distances between you and different things going on in your lives. Again, looking back at 21-year-old Sean, I still keep in touch with a lot of my friends from college via things like Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and things like that have allowed me to keep in contact with them. Where if those, social media platforms didn't exist, those friends may have sort of slipped away from my life, right? So there's a lot to be happy about in terms of the influence of social media, but obviously we also know that with the internet, there's both a good and a bad. And with social media, there can be a dark side to it as well. But in terms of these changes, we can see the almost meteoric changes in social media over the last 30 years. Um, Entertainment is much the same way. I think back to the early days of MP3, right? And thinking about things like Napster and the first MP3 players and that sort of thing. The first player came out in 97. And then, believe it or not, in just 10 short years after that, Netflix began streaming. So 10 years from the first MP3 player to an actual streaming service. And then, of course, Netflix has become kind of a movie studio in and of itself, along with, Amazon and others, where they're creating their own content and not just streaming content created by traditional Hollywood studios. And of course, we've also seen environmental changes. Climate change obviously has been a real hot topic for good reason. In the last 30 years, I pulled this off of the EPA website, but 9 of the 10 warmest years on record in the United States have occurred since 1998. That's one of many sobering statistics about climate change, and obviously we're seeing a lot more extreme weather patterns, both in the US and globally in terms of droughts and wildfires, hurricanes and snowstorms and so forth. Um, it's daunting, right? And I'm not gonna lie and say that, this is an easy problem to solve. And I think again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, all of these types of challenges are wicked problems, right? They're all interdependent and complex, and it's not just one solution to them. Um, but in the case of environmental changes, there have been a number of efforts towards trying to address those things, more sustainable practices, creating things like the Paris Agreement in 2016 to try to limit, carbon footprint, as well as developed over the last 30 years to try to assist with environmental conservation, even to the point of using some of those conservation tactics to bring species back from the brink of extinction, and sort of recover some of the lost land and ocean that's been polluted. So a lot of good things that have happened in the last 30 years to try to combat these issues. But obviously we still have a far way to go. Political landscape has obviously changed quite a bit. I think one of the things that kind of, that I kind of latched onto here was looking at some of the major global events in terms of armed conflicts in the last 30 years. And unfortunately, there's no shortage of armed conflicts, both at a local and global level, in the last 30 years. Obviously, in the U.S., one of the ones that really stands out for me, at least, is the September 11th attacks in 2001. That had obviously a major impact both on the U.S. and globally in terms of how we cooperate internationally and diplomatic relations with various countries. There's been a lot of cooperation in spite of a lot of the fear that obviously came after the September 11th attacks. Um, and it has also led to also a rise in populism and nationalism, both for good and for bad. And so, obviously right now in 2024, 30 years later, we're still um, you know, dealing with a lot of I'll say some of the effects of some of these earlier conflicts, whether it's the occupation of the Crimea in 2014 or the Iraq War in 2003, or, take your pick. These conflicts have continued to change the political and landscape, globally. Health and medicine wise, we've also seen a lot of breakthroughs and innovations on the medical front. One of the biggest ones has been the Human Genome Project in 2003. And again, I could have just created slide on health and medicine when I was doing the research for this presentation online. It was just like, a slew of websites that were giving information about various medical breakthroughs in the last 30 years. Things like the first ever vaccine for certain forms of cancer came about in the last 30 years, which is amazing to me. But other breakthroughs, the Human Genome Project, and then in 2007, just 4 short years after the genome sequencing was complete, we get the first at-home DNA kit, 23andMe, came out in 2007, so that you could trace your ancestry. Um, on the other side, we've seen some not so good things in terms of the health and medicine front. COVID-19 being the biggest one, having to kind of find our way through a global pandemic and all the associated issues that came with that in terms of the local and global supply chain, trying to get vaccines and ventilators and other things where they're needed most, as well as, having access to the healthcare systems that are needed to kind of deal with the effects of the pandemic. Um, in addition, I think the information age and computing technology, high-speed internet, and the growth in general of the internet and mobile technology through smartphones has given rise to a lot of changes in how we manage and interact with our health data. In 1996 was HIPAA and the signing of the HIPAA Act to protect our privacy and medical information, which obviously is is a huge deal. But at a time when the internet was just coming into its own, has become even bigger deal as years have gone on in the time since that act was signed. Obviously, cyber threats and other things have uh, made it even more imperative that we find ways to protect our private information. In 1998, we all gained the ability to go online and Google symptoms and panic ourselves over the possibility that we have some horrible disease, as WebMD was first created back in '98. But in all honesty, the other thing about that creation is that it has given rise to a number of health resources and other reference information and other services that are available to us through the internet. And in fact, now in 2013, we have the creation of BetterHelp for online therapy. That's one of many different types of telehealth services that have really come into their own in the 2000s, after the internet kind of grew some legs and became higher speed. So all of those things I think are all good news stories. But again, as these things have grown up, they've grown up as a result of the impact of related technologies, smartphone devices, high-speed internet, e-commerce, et cetera, that have all kind of worked together to create an environment in which these kinds of changes are possible. Education and work. I'm a adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins, and also my son, who just recently, well, is now in senior in high school, but he had to kind of work his way through the aforementioned pandemic and online learning and that kind of thing. This is much like many Americans. This is all near and dear to my heart. But we've seen a lot of changes in education and work over the last 30 years. One of the ones that was and continues to be quite controversial is Common Core in learning environments, and that was something that came about in 2009. But believe it or not, when we talk about the new math, that actually was first introduced in the 50s, believe it or not, as a response to the launch of Sputnik. And basically Eisenhower and the federal government became very concerned about our educational system and making sure that we could compete with the Russians and turn out STEM professionals, although we didn't call it STEM back then, who could develop the new technologies we would need to keep pace with the Russians, or the Soviets, I guess, at the time, right? And so, but Common Core is still not while it's a new concept in 2009, Common Core itself and the idea of turning out students who understand the concepts behind what they're learning and are not just sort of memorizing the information, that has been a big deal. And in fact, from a learning perspective, I always think of my son, who's a budding engineer, and when he was in middle school, was given an RFP to have his team develop a green roller coaster, and was given a set of requirements and for safety and environmental impact and requirements for it to be fun yet safe and that kind of thing. And they had to come up with a proposed concept for a new roller coaster ride for a fictional amusement park. Um, that to me is amazing, right? To ask a bunch of middle schoolers to respond to an RFP. And I had to kind of tell him, you know what, that's kind of what dad does in his daily life as a systems engineer. But those kinds of things are very transformative, right? And over the last 30 years, it's gone from what I remember as a kid, where it was just memorizing equations, memorizing, multiplication tables, all that kind of stuff, to now, trying to focus more on thinking about what the meaning is behind those things. In addition, we've seen a rise, obviously, in remote work and digital collaboration. And in fact, again, with the pandemic, we saw an uptick in those capabilities, both from a technological standpoint and an uptick in the capabilities in terms of society and how we respond to working remotely and that kind of thing. When I worked at APL, and especially when I worked at Northrop Grumman, it was just coming to work every day, right? 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Once the pandemic hit, all of that changed. And it's interesting to see or think back, I guess, how various companies or organizations responded to that need to go virtual. Again, I remember teaching a class at Hopkins, and it was a virtual live course. So there could be students in the room with me when I was teaching, and I was over here at the Koziakoff Center here at the lab, and I was alone in the room because all my students were already remote. They were from all over the country. And when the pandemic first hit, one of the students asked online, "Hey, how's this going to affect our class? What are we going to do now with this pandemic?" And I kind of laughed and I said, "Guys, look at me in this room here. I'm all alone. Nothing's going to change, right? I'm just going to now do this class from home, and you guys will dial in like you've always dialed in, right?" But obviously, not everything went that smoothly during the 2020 pandemic and that impact. But due to technologies like Zoom, which apparently came out in 2011, I didn't realize it was quite that old, and Skype in 2003. I didn't realize that was that old either. We got through that, right? Other digital collaboration technologies like SharePoint, 2001. So pretty old. Obviously, SharePoint has aged a bit over time, and now we have, product lifecycle management tools. We have other kinds of enterprise repositories beyond just a sort of simple file share capabilities that we leveraged in the early SharePoint releases. Cloud computing, first commercial cloud computing or computing cloud came out in 2006, unveiled by Amazon. And then a couple years later, Google unveiled theirs. So we've seen a lot of those changes over time, even in terms of education. I mentioned, you know, uh, online learning and Zoom and that kind of thing. But, even with my son, I remember him using Blackboard in his school, in his high school, before they switched to Canvas. I remember him in middle school. His school had a Promethean board. It was like, this magical whiteboard, device that you could write on, and it would digitize everything you're writing, and it was amazing. And now it's like, old hat to them. Um, and even MATLAB, I mean, I threw this in here. MATLAB well predates this 30-year time period. The first MATLAB came out in 1984, believe it or not, with the first PC MATLAB for desktop. But I remember as a student, at RPI as an undergraduate, being impressed with, all these student versions of MATLAB, and the desktop MATLAB on all of our computers at our computing lab. And amazingly, just the other day, my son was doing a calculation on MATLAB on his phone, and he told me that he has the mobile device version of MATLAB. And sure enough, his cell phone, his iPhone was running, MATLAB, and he's, doing all sorts of calculations and creating graphs and things like that, which just blew my mind, right? The fact that he could do that on a mobile device. All right, so with all of those things, though, how has systems engineering changed in the last 30 years? So, Incose is not much older than our chapter. Incose started in 91, I think it was, as an international organization. There was an NCOSE, which was just the national version, which was a couple years before that. But by this time in 1994, Incose, as an international council on systems engineering, had been born and had now in 94 released its first copy of their systems engineering journal. And now we can get that in digital form. If you become an Incose member, you can sign up for that journal. After that, believe it or not, 3 years later, the first Perfect. So we've had a number of different advances over the last 30 years. USM, created by our chapter, by the Incose Chesapeake chapter. That to me, that's one of the things that when I think of the Incose Chesapeake chapter, that's one of the things I think of is our development of Incose's, USM methodology, the object-oriented systems engineering methodology, that was pioneered by, Mike Pafford and the team at the Chesapeake chapter, along with Sandy Friedenthal and others, my good friend Joe Wolfram, and later the USM methodology was sort of refined further by the Systems and Software Consortium and Lockheed Martin. So a lot of great work there. But, you know, after that, 2001, we had the Agile Manifesto published from a software engineering point of view. But of course, now we talk about Agile systems engineering. After that, 2002, those tenets in our SE handbook and the systems engineering lifecycle processes that we know and love all got codified into ISO 15288, which is the standard for systems engineering. And then 2003, SysML. So before that, there had been other things. There had been UML for SysML or UML for systems engineering and other kinds of language add-ons to the basic UML. But SysML as a formal language was first released in 2003. And now in this age, as Mike mentioned in my introduction, you can get an OCSMP, an object management group certification in systems modeling. And so a lot has changed, obviously, in terms of our discipline. One of the biggest things that happened then was 2007 with Incose's MBSE initiative. And under the leadership of folks like Sandy Friedenthal, we've seen a lot of strides in the MBSE world, and now evolving into the broader field of digital engineering and how our MBSE efforts plug into a larger engineering ecosystem that really does what we hope systems engineering will do, which is to be a touchstone through various engineering disciplines and kind of pull everything together. I sometimes, joke that I feel like systems engineers were like the general contractors, right? And we roll out the blueprints and we have the high level view of the system, and we're kind of a jack of all trades, but master of none kind of thing. And we know enough about the various things that are going on, whether it's mechanical, electrical, software, whatever it is, in order to be able to bring the entire system together. And I kind of see a general contractor for a house, let's say, doing a similar kind of role, right? They may not be the plumber or the electrician or doing the framing on the house, but that general contractor is able to kind of orchestrate things and make sure that things are being built properly. All right, next slide. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So one of the things, and I kind of stole my own thunder by mentioning this earlier in the presentation, but one of the things I think that is probably pretty obvious by looking at the various slides that I presented was that a lot of the advancements that we've seen, as well as a lot of the challenges that we've run into over the last 30 years, are not happening in isolation, right? In order to solve the climate crisis, for example, it's not enough just to say, well, let's just all drive EVs, right? Or let's all just stop burning coal, or let's stop, whatever, right? It requires systems thinking, and it requires holistic solutions that look at the socioeconomic impacts of those changes, that look at the political impacts of those changes, that take into account, global dynamics and cooperation, as well as the technical innovation and everything else, right? Same with the advancements we've made. The smartphone, that I'm talking to you now due to my computer having a blue screen of death. My smartphone, if it were just a phone, it would not be quite as popular a device as it is now in 2024. But the rise of the internet, the ability to digitally connect myself to the internet, have my phone be able to connect with other devices, like be a hotspot for my quickly rebooting computer here. That has made the smartphone a device that we can't live without. And when we talk about killer apps and these sorts of things, those capabilities didn't become what they are on just their own merits as an isolated technology, right? The smartphone is what it is because there's an internet, and even things like streaming services in terms of pop culture and entertainment. Netflix became a thing because of the ability to watch movies on a streaming device, on a mobile device, or the ability to have a high speed internet that supports that kind of streaming ability. So all those things kind of come into play. And I think, when we look at some of these advancements and some of the challenges that have emerged over the last 30 years, I think it merits taking a systems thinking approach and kind of looking at each of those areas that we looked at in the various slides as kind of an evolving system in an evolving system of systems. Except now in this ad hoc system of systems, all of these systems, if you want to call them that, are evolving, right? They're all evolving due to their interaction with the other systems. It's almost in a way like emergent behavior, where as we see, society changes, maybe technology changes as a result, or the other way around. As technology evolves, society changes, or whatever it might be. So, and then next slide. Oh, there we go. Next slide, please. There we go. So this slide again is just kind of what I want to note is, in order to address these challenges, these wicked problems, if you will, we can't have point solutions, right? If we look at what's involved in trying to address these wicked problems, the needs are often in direct conflict, or at the very least, they're in indirect conflict with one another. There may be technological or political or socioeconomic needs that either directly or indirectly impact one another in some way, and so we can't just attack one particular area. We have to look at the totality of the requirement set, right? Look at the totality of the stakeholder needs that need to be addressed. And as a result, these are very complex problems, right? And managing that complexity becomes critical. And in order to provide a solution, a holistic solution that will address everything that needs to be addressed, we need to be able to manage that complexity. We need to have a way of understanding what the primary, secondary, tertiary impacts of a particular change are on the overall system of systems, if you will, that all of these challenges exist in. And if all this sounds familiar, hey, you know what? Systems engineering to the rescue, right? That's what we do, right? Is take complex systems or systems of systems and think about those secondary impacts, tertiary impacts of a particular change to some element of the system or some system within our system of systems, and then be able to evaluate how well that solution will meet the needs of our stakeholders. And oftentimes our stakeholders' needs are in conflict with one another. So kind of what we do, right? And I think there's an opportunity here for Incose and all of us as members of Incose to, try to work to try to address some of these issues. Next slide. So in this one, like Uncle Sam says, we need you, right? We need you, all of you, just to help us. I think one of the things that I've been wrestling with is, what do we as a chapter do to go from here? What can we do as a chapter to advance systems engineering as a discipline? What can we do as a chapter to help Incose with realizing, the lofty and noble goals of their Vision 2035. If folks haven't seen the Vision 2035 from Incose, I highly recommend you go to incose.org and download a copy and take a look at it, because it talks about a lot of the challenges I've mentioned, whether they're socioeconomic or technological or political or environmental or you name it, right? How do we handle some of these emerging challenges that we face, while at the same time also advancing the state of the art and things for the betterment of everyone. And I think some of the things off the top of my head that I think would be useful for us from, I'll say, more of a tactical standpoint this year to maybe look at as ways that we can make an impact are, as I mentioned before, collaboration with our other chapters, right? There's strength in numbers, and we're not as smart as all of us are. And so if we can link together with folks from the Washington metro area chapter, or folks from the Southern Maryland chapter, or Hampton Roads, or Pennsylvania, or whatever it is, if we can link together with some of those chapters and work together on some of these areas, I think that would be a very positive thing that we can do. Now, as far as what we collaborate on, we'll have to think about that. I on my last bullet there, I kind of a callback to USM, but I think that was a very insightful, very meaningful product that continues to be very important to Cozy and to the broader MBSC community. That methodology is, it's taught in a lot of, universities. I teach it in my class at Hopkins, and are there things like that? Are there products like that we can champion as a chapter and work on together, as a chapter, work on together with our comrades in other chapters and champion those for helping to advance Incose's 2035 vision. And then the last thing I'll say is, as emeritus, as a chairperson-emeritus of the Incose Digital Engineering Information Exchange Working Group, get involved, in the working groups in Incose. The Incose International Workshop is happening very soon, and the IW is just a big clearinghouse of working groups rolling up their sleeves and getting involved and doing the good work of Incose to try to advance systems engineering for the common good. And I think it's an excellent forum, and if folks want to get involved, that's a great way to do it. But go out and see what kinds of working groups you might want to get involved with, and where you feel that you could make a difference, and where it also aligns with your own passions, whether professionally or personally, and see what you can do. And with that, I'll just say thank you, and I apologize for the crazy technical glitch. But I'll take any questions you might have.
All right, so if you have a question, please speak up or raise your hand. Let me lead off with one question that came from Steve Sutton. It says, Chesapeake past President John Thomas, past President John Thomas of Incose said that SEs must influence decision makers. How have we or can we influence decision makers in government and industry?
Wow, that is a great question. I think that's certainly a noble thing to do, right? And if you think about our role as systems engineers, let's say on a project, right? That's one of our responsibilities, right? Is to talk to those decision makers, like our project manager, let's say, right? And provide the technical options for addressing whatever the challenges on that project are. We might not, be able to, have the vision across all aspects of the project to be able to make that final decision. That's the job of that project manager. But we can certainly provide the technical options. And I think in a way, there's a similar kind of thing here. And I think, we can provide that influence to our decision makers in government and industry, show them, different options, different ways of doing things. I think it's challenging because in some ways, because of the way things are structured, we often are handed a set of requirements and then we're, told, hey, make one of these things or come up with a new design for that widget or whatever it is. But I don't think that means that we have to accept that as sort of a passive, in a passive role. I think we can be proactive, right? I think we can say, hey, have we thought about this? What about this option? Why don't we approach this from this standpoint? And I think there's a possibility there where we can, through organizations like Incose, have that kind of more impactful dialogue with decision makers. Let's say maybe you're part of a green initiative within Incose, and maybe Incose and our involvement as a chapter with that initiative, maybe we come up with a set of recommendations or set of technology areas to lean into that we recommend pouring research dollars into or whatever it might be. Who's to say that we then can't take that to decision makers at either the local or national or international level and provide those recommendations. So I think there's a lot of possibility for that. But yeah, it's certainly it's a tough challenge, right? It's tough to kind of exert that kind of influence, and I think it has to be, again, approached from a holistic standpoint, working together with various stakeholders, understanding the needs of those political decision makers, as well as understanding the needs of the community that we serve and trying to come up with options that we can provide.
Okay,
good.
thanks. Any other questions?
All right, good. Yeah, I'm looking at some of the comments here in the chat. Great comments. Yeah, Mike, I agree with your comment about, showing, not just telling the value of SEs. I think that's great. Grayson, Thinking in Systems. Yeah, I picked up that book. I have not read it yet. It's sitting on my desk, but it looks like a great read. So yeah, that's awesome. All right, good. Anybody have any other questions for me?
Yeah, this is Kaz, Sean, and maybe to the group. I guess it looks like digital engineering and MBSE getting married together looks very interesting. And obviously that's coming up, or has been, coming up for a while. You talk about having maybe a group chapters participation. Maybe we can do some type of virtual event. And have 3 or 4 chapters kind of like join in, and maybe you all be well, again, I don't know, since there's so much virtual stuff, it's kind of tough to convince people to hold some type of group event in person anymore. But something like that, they have DE and how MBSE is going to assist with that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I'll admit it, while I made a big deal about talking about digital collaboration and things like Zoom and whatnot, I'm kind of old school, and I do kind of miss in-person kind of get-togethers and gatherings and that sort of thing. And I think your idea is a good one, because where my head went when I thought about collaborating with other chapters was, I think about things like, the WMA used to have what they called the SEDC conference. It was a systems engineering conference, almost like a little mini Incose conference in the DC area. And I thought it was great. The last one I went to was in 2014, and did a presentation for it. And, to me, it was like going to like a mini, Incose IS, hearing different presentations and papers from folks in the Mid-Atlantic region. I actually, jokingly or half jokingly at the Incose IS, I mentioned to Steve Beamer and folks there that, because we happen to be sitting next to somebody from WMA chapter, and there was somebody else from Pennsylvania who was in attendance as well. And I joked, maybe we need to have something called the Mid-Atlantic Regional Symposium, Mars for short, and we could all joke about, hey, let's go to Mars, and it would be like a little mini symposium in the Mid-Atlantic region where we would have different technical tracks and presentations on digital engineering and MBSE and artificial intelligence, machine learning, whatever folks are interested in discussing. So that might be a possibility. And while that may seem like a real tall order to pull off, and certainly it is a lot of logistics. When I first got to the lab, to APL in the 2013 kind of time frame, I actually worked with Joe Wolfram and Terry Wolfram and actually the folks at the Incose Chesapeake chapter to put on a day-long, MBSE symposium. We held it here, actually, where I am now in Building 200, the space building at the APL campus, and it was great. It was a fantastic day-long set of technical presentations from folks from various industry organizations. We had speakers from Northrop Grumman and Atigo, or at the time, I guess they were Artisan, folks from Sodius and others, and talking about different aspects of MBSE and some of the challenges. Was that a lot of work to put together? Sure it was. But we did it, and it only took a couple months to kind of rally the troops and pull it off, and it happened in March of 2014. So nothing to say that we can't do a similar thing. So I guess in my call to arms, on that last slide, that's what I want to challenge all of us to think about. What are some of the things that we can do to try to share knowledge amongst ourselves with the broader community, to try to advance some of the dialogue around some of the state of the art in SE, and how do we also get more involved and more proactive about, influencing, Incose and influencing those decision makers and being able to be more impactful with our systems engineering. So, good.
Yeah, it looks like Joe Kasser says he just sat in on something there with Thailand or Japan.
Good.
Well,
Awesome.
so Sean, I just want to add, there is things like Western States Regional Conference, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I think the thing I want to pause and say to folks, if there's ways to collaborating, we can collaborate. I think what I would kind of question folks is, in what way do you want to collaborate with people, and how you yourself can contribute to the actual effort itself, right? Because it's not easy to actually not just help run a single chapter, but also collaborate across multiple chapters. So I want to encourage people to think, not just throw the idea of, hey, let's see if we can collaborate on this particular topic, but how you yourself can be involved. And if you need examples, there's Western States Regional. There is I forget what the New England chapter does, but they do conference, the New England Fall Workshop every October, if I remember correctly. So I encourage people to go take a look at the Incose events page, see what other chapters are doing, and not just throw the idea around, but also help Sean how Incose Chesapeake can build something towards that and contribute their time and effort to it.
Amen. Thank you, Risa. Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree.
How would it be different to joining working groups?
I'm sorry, say again?
How would it be different? How would it be different to the working groups?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they're complementary. There's, it's almost a, in some ways. So, for example, I mentioned I was chairperson of the Digital Engineering Information Exchange Working Group in Incose, and we were focused on that particular topic area, and we had a particular TPP and everything that we had to put together, a technical product plan and schedule and so forth, and kind of putting that stuff together.
there's not a lot of difference if we're doing something at a chapter level, like if we're, you know, in the case of USM, when the chapter created the USM product, I'm sure, and Mike Pafford can correct me if I'm wrong in this, but I'm pretty sure they had to put together some sort of a TPP and a schedule and that kind of thing, and kind of report back to Incose on the you know, the progress of USM and what they were working on. I envision there's a similar sort of thing. I think in the, you know, in the case of the working groups, you're kind of working, you know, collaboratively with these other chapters, with folks from, you know, the entire community, you know, internationally even. The DEIXWG, you know, we had a very broad group from, you know, every country you can imagine. We had folks dialing in from Asia and Australia and so forth, Middle East and Europe, all contributing, which is fantastic. And I think that that's something that I challenge all of us to do more of, is to get involved in those working groups. On the other hand, you know, something like USM or something like, you know, these things that we can sort of steer at a local level within our Chesapeake chapter, I think are also very impactful. And I think we can, you know, we have a little bit more freedom and latitude to kind of think of, you know, things that we believe are, you know, needed to kind of address and take on, but then we can, you know, kind of bring up to the broader Incose. And I see, Mike, did you have your hand up?
Actually,
No.
I put my hand up.
Oh, okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Based on experience in Asia as an Incose ambassador, I would suggest that collaboration between chapters is very useful in organizing events like regional conferences, whereas cooperation on technology, products, and advancing the state of the art, that is something best left to working groups.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's been kind of the, you know, the model, you know, in terms of how the sort of the space in which the working groups operate versus the chapter. And I think there's some good comments here in the chat as well. Yeah, Mike, I agree with you. I think, you know, supporting our student chapters or universities, I think that's an area that I'd like to see us work on renewing those relationships this year as well. You know, we have a chapter at Hopkins. I think the WMA interacts with a chapter at George Mason. I can't remember. But I'd like to see that relationship kind of renewed a little bit too. You know, I think we have a responsibility to kind of help prepare the next generation for, you know, these systems engineering challenges that they're going to have to face. So, but yeah, great comment and questions about, you know, I think the difference between the, you know, the efforts of the working groups versus the chapter. I think you're spot on.
Either
All
that,
right.
either that or start something revolutionary, like, can we do systems engineering without requirements?
Yeah. You know, and it's funny because, you know, I was, you know, at a meeting with, was it David Cohen? Is that the name from, who's the SE lead for, what was it? Gosh, not OSD, but he's on the government side. But I remember a workshop with him and Philomena Zimmerman and others when the digital engineering strategy was in its infancy, and we are talking about that. And part of his keynote was exactly that topic. Like, you know, if we say that the model of the system is a reflection of the requirements, then do we still need the requirements, or can we just have a model of the system and say, build me this, you know, and provide the appropriate level of detail and fidelity to have the model, you know, speak for the requirements, and rather than having a, you know, the possibility of a maintenance issue where you now have essentially the same facts in two different repositories, one in your requirements and one in your model. I think that's an ongoing kind of topic of discussion, and I'm, I'm always curious to hear what people think about either side of that argument. Do we get rid of requirements in general, or is there still a place for, those shall statements, and in a a complementary fashion where they're not kind of stepping on each other? But yeah, good. Yeah, Grayson, I see your chat here. First of all, welcome to the chapter. Glad to have you here. As far as a group discussion forum, that is a great question. I don't know if that's something that we have the capability to have on our website. I'm talking to, there's Incose Yammer. Good point. Yeah, that's good, Mike. Yeah, Incose Yammer. Although now I think it's not even Yammer. Didn't they go to a new thing like iNet or some sort of or did that just replace Incose Connect? I'm not sure. But yeah, Oasis Cafes, Joseph. Yep. Yeah, I'm sure we can figure out a way to do that, but I think it's a good thing to do. I actually liked Incose Yammer. That would kind of give you an ongoing sort of discussion forum, and you could subscribe to have email notifications when there were posts on various threads. So I would go to the Incose website, incose.org, the international website, and see about getting plugged into Incose's Yammer. I want to say though that I think they were trying to move to a different kind of collaboration platform, but yeah, we'll have to explore that. Okay, good. Yeah, Jen, agreed. Yeah, I like Yammer a lot. I'm hoping I'm wrong about them going away from that, because I kind of like Yammer. So, all right, good.
Hey, Sean, this is Steve Beamer. I don't know if they're getting rid of Yammer, but I do know they've added Teams. So there are some things we can do with Microsoft Teams that we can have at the chapter level. So that is something they added last year, and they're going to continue with that. Over.
Right. Yep. Okay, good. Yeah, and also hopefully folks are seeing in the chat here, Mike and Joseph have mentioned about the systems engineering Discord server. I'm a member of that. Lots of discussion on that Discord server. So, Grayson, if that's a medium that resonates with you, I think the Discord server is great. A lot of good discussion. Sometimes it's even hard to kind of keep up with it all, to be honest, because there's a lot of good stuff being posted. But yeah, take a look at that. And I know we're over our time, so I do apologize for kind of keeping you all late, but